Well, hello and welcome to our latest Register broadcast. Today we're here to talk about database replication, and specifically to answer the question, what's database replication got to do with digital business? My name is Dale Vile. A lot of you will know me. I'm a regular on RegCast panels. This time they've given me the steering wheel, so I'm actually driving today, which is hopefully I'll keep things on track. I'm here with Bill Brunt. Bill is product manager at Dell Software. So welcome, Bill, and it'd be great if you could introduce yourself.
Oh, thanks so much, Dale. So I'm the product manager here at Dell Software for SharePlex. I first started using Oracle back in 1988. I presented at various Oracle events, Open World, IOUG in the past, etc. And I was a SharePlex customer before coming on board.
Okay, great. So for those of you that haven't figured this out, SharePlex is the database replication solution that Bill is responsible for. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But as Bill's sort of hinted at there, database replication has been around for quite a few years. I first came across it when I was working at Sybase back in the early 90s. We had a product called, very original name, Replication Server, which I think is still around today, although I haven't heard much of it. So it's not a new concept as such, database replication, but it has actually evolved over the interim period, and that's really what we're going to be covering today. So this is really a new take on database replication. We will be touching on some of the traditional use cases for those that are maybe less familiar with this area in a second, but what we want to do is quickly move on to how requirements are developing and some of the opportunities around emerging use cases, particularly in the context of digital business. So that's where we're heading with this. But to begin with, Bill, maybe you could take us a little bit more into your baby, some of the background, and maybe explain this phrase that we've got on this slide here, heterogeneous database replication, and what that actually means.
Sure. So the phrase heterogeneous just means that we're able to replicate between different kinds of databases. In the early days, it would typically be Oracle replicating to Oracle. And today, especially with the advent of the use of so many different databases out there, the need to be able to move data at extremely high speed with low overhead between different kinds of databases means that heterogeneous database replication can move data from Oracle to SQL Server to Hadoop to you name it, just about any kind of relational or NoSQL database out there.
So that's certainly something that we found, and that the world is moving more and more heterogeneous, particularly in the database space. I think gone are the days when you were down to almost three options. There's a lot more to consider now in terms of the kind of technology that's going to underpin your application, or technologies, I should say, because quite often a given application can use multiple database technologies, I guess, today. By replication, actually, I just have one question for you. We're not really talking about mirroring here, are we? We're talking about potentially being pretty selective in terms of the data we move between servers. Is that right?
We can do both. So it can be and often is the entire database, particularly when the use case is centered around availability. But you're right. We can be very selective. For example, we can choose to move only certain columns or even rows which match a given value. And this can be out of only certain tables within the entire database. So there's tremendous granularity today in terms of what data gets replicated and where it's going to. It can be, and like I said, often is the entire database when the applications are centered around availability, but tends to get more selective around other use cases.
Well, mentioning use cases, let's talk through some of the traditional use cases that we've seen replication technology applied to.
Okay, so we really have three broad categories where people are using replication today: availability, scalability, and integration. And we are seeing, a transition from the scalability side really to integration. And I'll distinguish the two in just a moment. But on the availability side, it basically comes down to helping the database be available, whether there are planned or unplanned events that would normally disrupt service. And the first two use cases, high availability / disaster recovery, along with migrations, patches, and upgrades, it's really the exact same deployment. And a customer can choose to upgrade, make really substantial changes in their infrastructure, and still keep their database up and running by using replication. The reason we're showing a dashed arrow with migrations, patches, and upgrades is because typically this is where we have what we'll call an as-is environment and then a to-be. In other words, they're moving from their existing as-is to a new to-be, future environment. And hopefully everything goes as planned. The dashed arrow means that we have the ability to allow you to fail back or as an insurance policy should something go wrong with your migration. This has turned out to be more popular than we anticipated, because if something does go wrong, and it's nothing to do with SharePlex or necessarily the migration itself, it can be an integration that wasn't set up correctly, and rather than being caught in the awkward scenario of, oh my gosh, I've got this new platform that's working really well except for this one problem, do I go back to the original environment where everything works but I don't have all my data? Well, database replication solves that problem and allows you to return to your original environment, yet have all the data that was entered in the new system there.
Yeah, so it's not like just taking a snapshot and then you have to worry about what's happened between when the snapshot was taken and the time at which you roll back. You really can restore to the point, including all of the latest transactions that have been incurred since.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in that position myself years ago as a database administrator, and it can be quite hairy, and it's something which, having that sort of level of confidence that you can get back to where you need to be without actually losing anything. I can imagine why the demand for that is so high. So what about the load balancing one you've got there?
So that's really nirvana. It's the only one shown in the picture where the arrows, where the lines actually have arrows at both ends. And the reason for that is because all of these databases are actually active, and the applications, there can be multiple instances of the application, can interact with any copy of the database. Now, granted, this is asynchronous replication, and whenever you have that scenario occurring, that is multiple copies of the database being accessible by the application, which are maintained asynchronously, you have the potential for something we call conflicts to occur. And basically the same records are acted upon in different databases at nearly the same time or the same time. Sure. And so these will overlap or conflict with one another. And I say it's nirvana because it's extremely appealing to have this kind of capability, but it's also a heck of a lot of work to put it into place. Amongst all the providers, ourselves included, there is no silver bullet to manage conflicts. It's generally speaking significantly more effort than many of these other cases, but of course the benefits are enormous. Imagine being able just to arbitrarily connect to any database as long as there's one available, and that's very exciting for the highest end mission critical databases out there.
Yeah, and I guess it's a business question more than anything else, isn't it? I mean, if there is a risk of all the conflicts occurring and a transaction not completing for whatever reason, then if that's 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000, 1 in 100,000, you make a judgment as to whether the impact of that is worth it, given that massively improved response times, I guess, if you get this right, through load balancing, means that you've got, for instance, far fewer abandonments on your online store system or your booking system or whatever it happens to be. So abandonments quite often will massively outweigh, because the performance problems will massively outweigh any potential transaction loss that might take place.
Absolutely, and it's not so much that we're facing transaction loss, because we're able to reconcile and overcome the conflicts and merge the results. So there's not a danger of that occurring. And the abandonment aspect is usually a huge driver. So, for example, one of our largest deployments here in Active is a cellular provider here in the U.S. with over 100 million subscribers. In order to activate one of their phones, it goes through a system which is in active-active with 3 databases. And of course, they simply cannot afford to have their activation service down. They've deployed, and they have great results around availability and load balancing.
It's interesting because I've heard a lot of people talk about NoSQL databases almost as a cache front end for back-end systems, but the problem there is persistence and integrity. So this is an alternative to that, which sounds as if there's a lot less risk of data loss and transaction loss.
Absolutely. I mean, the only time we will have transaction loss is in the event of a disaster. Any of the planned maintenance events or kind of normal operations, such as active-active conflict resolution, we're not going to have loss of data. Now, the transaction loss that occurs, of course, is governed by the recovery point objective, and it's not 0, but it's one of the best on the market. Typically less than 2 to 3 seconds. So very, very quick recovery time objectives because the database is already up and running, and very close to, but not 0, recovery point objective.
Yeah, fantastic. So, what about scalability?
That's a great question. So, many of our customers in the early days, this was our most popular use case. I will tell the folks listening that there's different architectures that people can deploy, and the ability to distribute a load across multiple databases where you keep them in sync. In fact, using an age-old technique called sharding, where databases are divided up and segmented by different activities. We have a very popular, I would hazard to guess, the world's leading online presentation company runs a combination of Oracle and SharePlex in the background, and they run more than 350 databases that are kept in sync with SharePlex, and they provide nearly unlimited scaling. They'll put a certain amount of load on a given database, and if they need more capacity, they stand up an additional copy of the database, which mirrors in structure many of the others, and then SharePlex does the synchronization for all of the activities and gives them a very linear, cost-effective scaling capability.
That's cool. And that one on the far right there in the middle, the cascading intermediary systems, looks like you can get multi-level distribution of data.
Well, absolutely. I mean, there's a popular bank over in Europe that has some 1,200 databases that they keep in sync, using this through a multi-tiered, distribution and cascading system. These are just basic building blocks, and people have truly gone, very large scale with these kinds of deployments.
Yeah. Now the one-way arrows there on that second layer of in the scalability part of the diagram suggests that you've kind of got read-only as you go out through your distribution model. But then when we get to integration, you're starting to have things moving in the other direction. So do you want to talk us through the integration piece?
Sure. So the integration is beyond just moving data as it exists. And I'll give you some examples. So first of all, we can choose to run transformation as part of the replication process. And so there's certain attributes that will be available to us to change that's come in through the source. For example, we'll know the kind of operation that it is, i.e. insert, update, delete. We'll know what the object is. And then for each of the columns in that object, we will usually know the before and after values. And so we actually expose that information, i.e. the object and the type of operation, along with, in another data structure, a row for each column. And then we allow you to take this data, which comes in, and create your own PL SQL routine. Translation: if I have an OLTP system, second, third, normal form, and I'd like to populate a data warehouse with a star schema, fact, and supporting dimension tables, in near real time, SharePlex can stream that data. It can say, okay, here's a new Fact record is the supporting dimension present? Nope, it's not. And automatically populate that through the PL SQL routines. So very sophisticated transformation is possible. Now, not only that, the change history metadata capability, we have available who made the change, what the type of operation was, what the source data, the host, lots of other what we call metadata that may not exist in the table. For example, not a lot of tables are stamped with the user ID that made the change or the date and time. You can do that, but that's extra work. Now, using SharePlex, you can add this information automatically into the stream and have it appear in copies of the table downstream with, literally no additional overhead. And then the change history aspect is this. Imagine, if you will, being able to look at every single value that a table ever held. And so rather than turn deletes into deletes, updates, and so on, we take every single record and turn it into an insert, so it becomes a sequential stream or a log of the changes that were applied. When you couple that with centralized reporting and consolidation, here, and along with the metadata, here's what you can get. Imagine being able to go to a single database in your enterprise that contains all of the changes taking place to sensitive tables and data in your organization, and knowing who made the change and every value that it ever held at what point in time. And that's what we can give you. Now, Oracle Auditing does the same, but it takes an awful lot of overhead to do so. And SharePlex does this with very little overhead and the ability to consolidate from multiple instances to a single.
So that sounds pretty good from a compliance perspective. I'm guessing as well that if you're getting involved in forensics, for instance, following some kind of security breach, that you can use that kind of analysis and information to help figure out how changes cascaded or propagated in various different ways throughout the system, the origin, and then where they ended up.
Yes, we can. Now we are very careful when we're describing this to people because, of course, security breaches, they can involve the theft of data, or they can involve changes in data, or some combination thereof. What we're going to be giving you is very specifically the changes that took place. And if you're looking to reconstruct, the trail or lineage of data, then we are a very strong offering there. We are not an access auditing tool in any fashion.
Yeah, that makes sense. But when you're involved in these kind of exercises, you're trying to get your hands on as much raw data and information as possible to troubleshoot your way through it. It can get pretty complex from what I understand. So what's that last one, centralized reporting and consolidation? That looks fairly straightforward to me. Anything particularly on that one you want to say?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing is it's usually important to augment the streams with some additional information that identifies the source, because many times the data being consolidated can come from databases with very similar, if not identical, structures.
Yep.
And so this is where the ability to add metadata, i.e., here's the name of the Oracle instance, here's the name of the host, becomes important, particularly to uniquely identify the record and where it came from.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Okay, that's really good. So moving on then, let's take it forward, because one of the things, as we said at the beginning, we want to get to is looking at how some of these traditional use cases are evolving over time. Now, what I've got here on this chart that we're looking at now is a bunch of stuff that came out of some recent research that we did, and I'll ask for a bit of forgiveness, and a lot of this is fairly obvious when you actually say it out loud, but it's useful to focus our minds and really give a bit of backdrop in terms of the kind of environment that IT departments are operating in nowadays. So let's just quickly run through these. These were agree or disagree questions in a survey, if you want to know where they came from. I think it was about 400 respondents that we spoke to, senior IT guys. And for each one of these statements we have here, at least 3/4 said they agreed with each of these statements, and actually very few, tiny percentage, said they actually disagreed. So very quickly, one of the things we're hearing is IT is critical pretty much for most organizations now to differentiate and compete in the market. So that's not only through internal optimization, but also as we expose our systems to the outside world. So that's a pretty big thing that comes through very strongly. Most of our major business initiatives now have a significant IT component to them. So IT is on the critical path, and we're going to be talking a little bit later about what that translates to. One thing that you've already mentioned, Bill, is the range of applications considered critical today is much broader than it was 5 years ago. It used to be the case that when you spoke to someone and you said, well, what percentage of your applications would you regard as business critical? They maybe say 10 or 20%, and 80% are kind of nice to have. Now it's as likely to be the other way around. Now you can debate what business critical actually means, but the main thing is that now a lot of what we traditionally think of as nice-to-have applications have kind of made their way into the lives of users and even customers for externally facing stuff. And on the basis that perception is reality, those things are considered critical by the users. So from an IT perspective, we need to be very cognizant of the sensitivity around those. And then that last one in that first section, competing effectively requires enabling the best digital customer experience. A lot of people immediately think of usability and user interfaces around that. But obviously, experiences is as much, if not more, defined by is the application available when I want to use it? And even if it is available, does it perform so that I can use it? Does it perform well enough so I can use it comfortably? So availability and performance are a pretty big part of the experience side of things. And then those last things there you can see just fall out of this. So IT systems that are fast and reliable are now mandatory, not optional. That's the performance imperative. IT security and data protection are now key parts of business risk management. A lot of these things now are discussed at board level because the IT component of our business operations is so visible, and we're so sensitive to it now that we need to take care of that, and with everything being more connected. And then that last one, rapid response to new and changing business requirements as a priority for IT. We hear that pretty much across the board, the agility imperative, as we call it. So these are kind of things that you're seeing coming back from your customer base, Bill.
Oh, absolutely. It's, and I think some of the workplace trends, particularly around mobility and, remote workers working from home office are driving so much of that. I mean, if you look at the consumer expectations have moved into the business world for us. We expect that on the consumer side, if we go to a website, it's going to work. And that same kind of expectation now applies to so many of the portals, particularly as people are working nights and weekends and flexing their schedules, whether it be to do travel or run various applications. The idea of it being down is so unacceptable for apps across the board that it's really driving this need for always on in applications people are using.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Before we came on to this call, we were discussing about how things are pretty lively out there in terms of demand for this stuff, and I think it's these kind of drivers that are really leading to an escalation, I guess, in terms of what's needed in some of the areas we've been talking about. Another bit of context before we move on is what we're looking at here is some data from a recent Register study. So this is a survey that we conducted on the Register, actually, about 2,000 Register readers. And one of the questions we asked was, is your organization likely to invest significantly in any of the following areas over the next 12 months? And it's pretty lively. There's a lot going on across different aspects of IT. And so some of the things that I picked out from this that would seem to be relevant to the database replication discussion are business applications, new systems, upgrades, and so on, whether it be ERP, CRM, that kind of thing. Also, customer engagement solutions, the digital web side of things, obviously a lot going on there, a lot of data moving around, quite often in a distributed way. And clearly, database-related investments, there's going to be a role in there. But when we were looking at this, Bill, you said we should also flag things like core infrastructure and systems middleware and virtualization and so on. What was in your mind when you said that?
Sure. So, you mentioned data growth and just a moment ago, and whether it's because of the increase in devices out there and logs of data from social media, the Internet of Things with sensor data coming from places like never before. All of these factors are, placing demands on infrastructure, middleware, business applications to be able to process and move more and more data. And then, of course, as the database gets bigger, fortunately, we are seeing, better performance from each version of the database, but the data growth, frankly, seems to be outstripping this. So people end up with these larger and larger databases, and they're looking to distribute data and share amongst different applications. And database replication helps in all of these areas around the availability, scalability, and data integration. I mean, if you're going to pull out your servers and invest and refresh, in new ones, it's very hard today to go to the business and say, well, we've got a new server coming online, and it's going to be really great, but we're going to need to take, this amount of downtime. And it's unacceptable, and this is where we come in.
Yeah, and we spent a lot of time looking at scale-out storage architectures versus scale-up storage architectures, and I think sometimes you just need to break the problem down into smaller pieces and start looking at a distributed architecture, which is different again. And I think that's where database replication really starts to allow you to tackle problems in different ways, isn't it?
Absolutely. Now it's interesting because we do have customers, very large customers, who have chosen, on the one hand, to scale up, and others who scale out or horizontally, where they distribute the application. And I will say that those who have chosen the latter tend to have a very consistent and predictable and linear capabilities. In other words, they want additional capacity. They know that each node that they add, this is a very loosely coupled architecture, using database replication, but it's very predictable.
Yeah.
Those that scale up, they're able to do so, but they're constantly needing to pay attention to upper limits as more and more volumes come into the system. Each approach has its advantages, but it does seem that the very large single system approach brings with it a lot more intensity, I'll say.
Yeah, we ran another research study with the Reg readers actually quite recently on capacity planning, and exactly as you've just described, a lot of these guys are struggling with growth in these centralized scale-up environments. And the tools are, they only partially help. A lot of people are just relying on systems admins just keeping an eye on things and making a judgment as to how fast things are moving and when certain thresholds are being hit. It's as much of an art form as a science is what comes through from the sort of research we hear. So making that problem go away, or not go away, but certainly alleviating it by just spreading things around. It can actually reduce a lot of overhead, which might be counterintuitive, but it actually makes life easier from a capacity management point of view often.
Absolutely. I mean, the ability, if you can, take the time to shard or break your application down into chunks that can be processed and easily, put into a loosely distributed cluster type configuration. The planning and capacity management aspects are so greatly simplified. We've had many conversations with folks to say, look, as you consider your long-term future, it's important every once in a while to revisit this. And we've had a number of customers switch to that kind of setup.
Yeah. So already we're getting some interesting ideas come through in terms of how database replication might be relevant in ways that people hadn't thought of. But let's look at some of the emerging use cases. So what we've got here are four that we're going to focus on over the next few minutes. So the first one is enhancing application performance, and you added TCO to that, so I'd be interested to see what you have to say around that. The next one is ensuring digital application availability. Now, we've already spoken about that, but the game is changing, as we've said, so we'll look a bit more closely there. Protecting against new style of threats. And I know you've got some interesting scenarios that you want to go through there, Bill, so again, looking forward to that. And then the last one, supporting modern integration requirements, which is an area that we've looked at quite a bit here in Freeform Dynamics, and be interesting to get your take on where database replication fits into that last one. So let's kick off with the enhancing application performance and TCO one. Take us through what you've got on this slide here.
Sure. So with data growth, of course, comes greater volumes that need to be gone through, particularly on the analytics side. And there's a number of technologies out there to be able to do this. Whether you're using some of the NoSQL database with strong analytic capabilities like Hadoop and so on, or some of the in-memory capabilities. There's different ways that you can do this. And what we've done with database replication is to provide a really cost-effective way to scale out and give you some application performance. It's very popular in media today around in-memory database technologies from both Oracle and with SAP HANA. And what this does is it gives you a single central database, and it's in a single location. It's more of the same, if you will. It's here's my database, but now it's in memory and it's going to be faster. These turn out to be fairly expensive to own and operate because when a customer says, all right, I've got a 5 terabyte database and I'd like in-memory capability there, that means they're going to buy a box with probably 6 or more terabytes of physical memory in it. These sorts of things are not cheap. The performance is there, and then they've got to manage data growth. Oracle makes some platforms with as much as 32 terabytes of physical memory. And so your only capability there with the in-memory database is this scaling aspect. SharePlex doing replication really provides you much more flexibility and capability. So I can, for example, have an Oracle 12c database and purchase the in-memory option. Or I can replicate to a Postgres database, perhaps Postgres Advanced Server from Enterprise DB, which has a Redwood compatibility mode. It is significantly lower cost to own and operate than Oracle is. And by replicating to a platform like this, instead of pursuing the in-memory option, it's a much lower total cost of ownership. Plus, you're not left with your data at a single location. You can geographically distribute. In the use cases, we were looking at broadcasting. Imagine, having a business which is centered, say, in London or Frankfurt, any of these, major business centers, and then they have operations perhaps in Singapore, Los Angeles, New York. And imagine making a local copy of the data available for staff there, but only the data that they need. And this allows you to mix and match database technologies as well. And if you do need additional capacity, then, hey, I can put my workload in the cloud, scale up massively. We see this particularly around the holiday season, November, December, January, where people are wanting to move workloads. And not only giving you scalability capabilities, but at the same time, replication delivers increased availability and data integration all in one. And so what's really new for us here is that we're seeing customers say, you know what, I'm going to take data from Oracle, I'm going to take data from SQL Server, and I'm going to put this into perhaps Postgres, or I'm going to put this into the cloud. And these are new use cases where people are mixing database technologies to serve the same application.
Yeah, so you're helping people really go down a mix and match route. The penalty for heterogeneity is a lot less with this kind of technology in play, which means that you can actually distribute, you can take advantage of lower cost options. And I can probably say as an analyst, there are lots of people out there who Oracle licensing is killing them, and when they're looking at putting a distributed model in place, maybe populating a branch network or as you say, sort of international offices and so on, it does constrain them, and you don't really want to be constrained in that way. But then as soon as you start to mix and match different database technologies, you've got the problem of keeping it in sync. So you're making a lot of that problem go away. The other thing I would say, and it's come through quite strongly in some stuff we've done with register readers again over the last couple of years, is data proximity is a pretty big thing, particularly from a latency perspective. So, when you've got online applications in particular, if they're having to sort of cross the Atlantic to go and retrieve data, then the latency that's actually introduced can potentially be quite significant. So having replication out to the various regions can make your the experience of the end user or the online customer a lot more snappy. So in that sense, there are just so many benefits to sort of thinking replication in this digital world. So that makes an awful lot of sense. Coming on to the next one, application availability. Again, we've touched on this quite a few times already, but what's changed in here, and what do you think the new world is throwing up that we can deal with through database replication?
Probably the biggest thing that we're seeing is there are some, major shifts that organizations are deploying for their database technologies. So, you mentioned the big three, and I remember that as well. I mean, you're going to be running DB2, SQL Server, or Oracle. It's going to be one of those, and likely you're going to standardize on it. That kind of approach is so unusual today. People are thirsty for alternatives, and just what SAP has done. We were talking about this before the call. I mean, it's enormous. SAP is coming at the marketplace and saying, look, we know that we've had the traditional big three plus our SAP, ASE, aka Sybase technology out there, but we've got a new solution for you. We've got HANA. And I will tell you, I've looked at HANA quite a bit, run it personally, and it is an impressive piece of German engineering. And what's going to happen is we're going to see hundreds of thousands of organizations switching their database technologies, not just, what the database is, but where it's running. And the alternatives are enormous. So we're going to see this mass movement of hundreds of thousands of people going from Oracle to HANA. We're going to see adoption of Postgres and MySQL, particularly with some of the compatibility that exists today with these technologies. The trend to really be agnostic to your database and support so many different technologies is truly accelerating out there.
So that makes a lot of sense. So we're going to see more migrations as more database options come up, and people want that freedom to mix and match. What about things like DevOps and continuous delivery? I mean, when we mention DevOps, a lot of people focus on the dev side of things, which is one of my hobby horses. But actually, unless you have, let's call it agile operation capability, then you're kind of dead in the water, because you can't flush those rapid changes from the agile development environment down through the pipeline and out into the production environment. And again, lots of people there talk about things like platform provisioning and Puppet and Chef and so on. And not a lot of attention is actually paid to making those database changes. And it may only be one change, it may be a fairly simple change, but it might be an absolutely critical change to get that new feature out into the hands of customers or users. Do you see replication being used in that context?
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up, because the last bullet here really talks about a cutting-edge use case, and that is maintaining availability of the application while the application version changes. There's a very large, well-known logistics carrier out there that is seen the world over, and they recently completed an upgrade of their Oracle EBS application, going from version 11i to R12. So not the database, but the application itself. Now, they could not take their business, and they run core parts of their logistics business through EBS. They simply could not take it offline, to do this. And they've been a long-time SharePlex customer for scalability. They offload the reporting workload from Oracle EBS using SharePlex. They had previously upgraded their database, going from 11G to 12C using SharePlex. And when the application upgrade presented itself, they didn't know what they were going to do. And then the DBA team came forward and said, look, we've never done this before, but we believe that we can maintain availability even though the scheme is going to be changing underneath us while we do this application version upgrade. And we talked about the the PL SQL transformation capability. And so that's what we did for them. We coded the changes necessary to maintain availability of the application, and they kept running while they moved from 11i to R12. And the only downtime they had to take is to get the users to log out of the 11i instance and then log into the R12. So rather remarkable that can be done. It's a lot of work. I think we're going to see more capabilities in this area. Replication isn't the only solution. Database editioning, for example,
sure.
Is going to be very popular. Most of the package vendors will utilize that. And this kind of capability using replication will really be deployed on custom applications, I think, in the future.
Yeah, so you want replication as part of your toolkit to manage that fast-moving environment that's a reality now in a lot of organizations. So let's move on to protecting against new style threats, the risk management side of things.
Yeah, so we've done some pretty neat things. In fact, basically we find that when you get into security and people wanting to protect data, it occurs in a couple of different fashions. One is there are some segments of the marketplace that are, I would say, particularly concerned about security. The oil and gas industry over in the Middle East, as well, it's not necessarily well known. If you look around, do some Googling, you'll see that they've suffered a number of cyber attacks, and that can affect and has affected their operations. I don't think we need to explain why nuclear power generation, has a computer control component that we want to make sure remains under control of the right people. And then, of course, you've got intelligence communities. And in the intelligence community, what we've seen is these tend to be consolidation applications. I don't think this is any surprise. The likes of Edward Snowden made this very well known. I will tell you that what Edward Snowden revealed, I think, is pervasive throughout the world, at least from our experience, and that is that, our intelligence agencies are working to protect us at home. And by so doing, they take a tremendous amount of data and consolidate it from different sources, whether it be call information, et cetera. The networks that they're moving from and to are different security levels. Typically there's a lower security level where when you move it into an intelligence network for this kind of analytic capability, it's a very high security network. We partnered, and you'll see in the future, our next version of SharePlex 9.0, which is coming out early next year, we're going to be announcing a partnership with Fox IT for an OEM solution. And it's a combination of SharePlex and Fox IT's data diode, where we're able to create these secure one-way networks. And the folks at Fox IT, I have to commend them in the work that we've done. We've deployed this at a Middle Eastern customer for security of their borders, and it's a very secure solution where you can move data one way, either into a network or simply pull data out of a network. This is an exciting use case because it's like yelling into a room and just hoping that somebody hears you, and not putting any of your data at risk. It's a very, very good solution when you have security issues that you need to be dealing with.
Yeah, I'd imagine we're going to see more of these sorts of shapes of problems come up just in general business as time goes on, and we're collecting more and more data from more and more different sources and aggregating it. Maybe not on the scale of some of the intelligence players, but certainly a lot of data.
Dell itself makes a tremendous number of IoT devices, and with these IoT devices, what we're finding is there's the edge of the network, as you will, and the edge is continuously spreading out. It's amazing the data collection that's occurring. And so because of the amount of data that's being generated, it's just enormous. These edge connectors often perform consolidation functions. And as data from nearly everywhere begins to consolidate, and it will consolidate a given device may contribute to consolidation in dozens or scores of systems, and the data volumes are just enormous. And certainly we want to make sure that such networks are secure.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So let's move on to our last new area, talking about data integration here. So what have you got on this one?
Yeah, so we've talked about the interoperability amongst databases and data stores, and that traditionally replication was Oracle to Oracle. So far, we've really been just talking about relational database technologies. We have the ability to take changes out of databases and move them to different kinds of messaging systems, whether it's JMS or Kafka. We can also write data out to different kinds of files. And our abilities around translation or transformation of the data is growing in sophistication. And so what we're envisioning is, because of data growth, there are a slew of EAI tools out there or integration as a platform. And we're seeing some convergence now where customers that would traditionally consider only an EAI tool are looking at replication because, frankly, it's much lower overhead. It can handle much higher volumes with extremely low latency. So the data growth is driving replication into the integration space. And then what we've helped is that existing data integration solutions, typically focus on having many, many connections at the application level. They'll use APIs or they'll use triggers, and they have these very strong translation capabilities. And unfortunately, this approach leads to very high overhead on your systems. Very broad connectivity capabilities, certainly. But replication solves those problems with the lower overhead, higher volumes, and low latency.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's a good example of an established technique and set of technologies coming into their own in a new context, this, I think. So let's we're getting close to the end now. So just to finish off, maybe I should issue a bit of a pitch alert here to those listening, because I'm going to give you the opportunity, Bill, to really sum up the SharePlex proposition. Now, we do have a lot of vendors, IT vendors, come on these kind of events, and they talk a lot about the problems that exist and the opportunities that exist and so on. And then when we get to the point of, well, how can you help? It's amazing how many of them sort of start stuttering a little bit. But you can actually help with a lot of this stuff. So why don't you just sort of pull it together? Take a few minutes just to give us the pitch.
Sure. So it's interesting. SharePlex does have this 18-year-old legacy, and it's 18 years of enhancements, as the slide says. And ironically, I'm aware of 18 logical database replication vendors out there. And, so what should you be looking for amongst such a large and what turning out to be a growing field of providers in this space? And here's where we will distinguish ourselves. Certainly, other vendors have distinguishing capabilities where they've built a particular niche. Given our legacy and the time in the marketplace, it is certainly fair to say that we are industrial strength and battle hardened. I am constantly surprised at how intricate some of these scenarios can become. And more and more often, because of our experience, it turns out that we've got a flag or a setting or an alert or a automated self-healing capability that recognizes what is going on and then has the ability to maintain replication while this is occurring.
Sure.
New vendors in this space, I think, start out by doing very well in a proof of concept or demonstration mode, however, begin to fall down, after months of being into place with all the variants that emerge from production deployments.
Yep.
So we're very proud of our history. It's always interesting when you have something which is shiny and new. And when you're dealing with an 18-year-old piece of software, we can't make that claim. But what we can claim is that an 18-year-old in a race is pretty strong.
Mm.
Now, another piece that becomes particularly important, as we talk about some of the drivers around always on and availability and so on, is that support becomes even more important than you would imagine. Because if something does go wrong around these mission critical systems, then you really need a support partner who's going to be able to step up and work with you and fix it. And this is time and time again, we have customers telling us. In fact, I'll share a quick story. One of our customers told us they run both SharePlex and Golden Gate. And we asked them, we said, why do you have both technologies in place? Because we've each wanted to dominate the marketplace or dominate the deployment at this particular very large customer. And they said, well, anytime that the application is mission critical, we use SharePlex. I said, okay, that makes sense. Now, we've also been very innovative throughout the life of our product. We are one of only 2 solutions that I'm aware of out there, for example, that replicates transactions before they commit, so that when the commit comes through, that's all that's left to do.
Yep.
We're the first ISV out there to replicate to HANA in May of this year. And, this all sounds very interesting, but it is very easy to learn more information by going to shareplex.com.
So you had a few things that you put on this next slide here. I think we've covered most of them. Is there anything in particular you want to pick out on this chart that you want to highlight?
Sure. I'll just make one comment, and that is in that second paragraph where it says EPX coupled architecture results in superior TCO, 90% reduction in complexity. So here's what we're talking about. When you use SharePlex, you set it up and you detail in a configuration file on your source what it is you're replicating from, where it's going to, and the route that it should take. SharePlex, unlike other replication solutions, is a highly coupled architecture. And so it will pick up that information and wake up all of the processes downstream and across different systems and automatically provide this configuration information and begin replication. There's no going to each of these individual processes. And I will tell you that we consistently hear, how much less effort it is to operate SharePlex than other products in the space. Our customers have told us it's anywhere from a 75% to a 90% savings. Here's a quote from a customer saying that, they went from 30 hours per week down to 30 minutes per week. That gives you some idea of how this kind of setup and operation of the product really pays off.
Yeah, and I must admit, before we came on air, I did spend a bit of time just asking around some of the accounts we work with, and I was getting similar feedback on SharePlex from an overhead and management point of view. So in that sense, I'm not an authority on this, but I can certainly verify that I'm hearing similar sorts of things. So that makes a lot of sense. So let me just stand back a little bit. I'm just going to put my analyst hat on for a second here, and just talk through some thoughts on taking advantage of the opportunity here around using modern database replication to pick off some of these emerging use cases. So the first thing is just to look out for those use cases that we've touched on, and that's not just new systems, but also existing systems. As some of your installed applications get used and stressed in different ways, then quite often the sorts of things we've been discussing will come into play. And I find that in this particular area, it's better to think about patterns than get hung up on specific scenarios, because you see the same shapes of problems. If you go back to that use case slide that we started out with, Bill, there you've got some sort of shapes of problems. That's the way I think of them. And they occur over and over again at different levels in the infrastructure. So just keep an eye out for that. The obvious thing is get up to speed on recent technology. We've been talking about the fact that database replication has been around for quite a few years now, decades in fact, and I think it's easy to fall into the trap that it's familiar. You know what it can do, how it does it, but actually, as Bill's alluded to, a lot of it has moved on quite significantly. So if you look at SharePlex today, it's a lot more capable than it was in the past. And as part of that, looking at the technology side of things, considering best of breed versus the solutions that you get from database vendors, now there are always pros and cons when you're looking at this, but that's probably something that you want to spend a little bit of time thinking about, and particularly if you're considering rationalizing your existing tool sets. One of the things we hear back from Reg readers in our surveys a lot is we've got far too many tools that do the same or similar things, and we know that it's no different in this particular space. So if you are looking at rationalizing, which a lot of you tell us you are doing across your tooling portfolio, then it's worth taking a step back and thinking about dealing with today's fast-moving heterogeneous world, which is really about the kind of flexibility and inclusivity that Bill spent a lot of time talking about, and making sure that whatever you go with lives up to that. So that's my view from an analyst perspective, pulling it together. Anything you'd add to that, Bill?
Yeah, I think that what we're seeing, from at least what I'm seeing out there from database vendors, is that their solutions are tending to favor their technologies.
Yep.
And whereas we tend to be much more agnostic. I'll give you a quick example. So it's very important if you're doing replication to manage things that can create data integrity issues. There's a concept called a cascading delete constraint. This is where you have a header file with detail lines, and if you delete the header record, it automatically deletes the detail lines.
Sure.
This is a popular capability in the databases. Now, we have a design approach in SharePlex to use to automatically manage cascading deletes, and our design will work independent of whatever database. So you could be replicating from Oracle to SQL Server, and it will work. What we're finding is that other vendors are only able to do these kinds of things for the database that they support.
That's often the case. I think the message there is the devil is in the detail. You have to look beyond the checkboxes, don't you, on PowerPoints and say, okay, well, what level of functionality sophistication is supported in the feature set when you go heterogeneous?
The database vendors, I think, are not only are they building these capabilities for their database, but at times they've also built the replication capabilities into the database itself. And we've seen where companies have to, if there's a bug, not just patch the replication software, but patch the database. And with SharePlex, you don't have any such challenges.
Yeah. So just to round off then, we've covered a lot, Bill, and thank you for that. And if the listeners wanted to act on any of the stuff we've been talking about, what would you recommend? Talk us through your last slide here.
Sure. I mean, as you would expect, we've got web pages out there with collateral. These include data sheets, videos, etc., white papers, tell you about upcoming events. And just go to shareplex.com, and it will redirect to the correct location on the Dell website. Now, it's nice to read about stuff, but there's nothing like getting your hands on the technology and to try it. We do offer free 30-day trials of the software with complimentary engineering and support assistance. So when we say complimentary SE or systems consultant, this is a field engineer that will work with you one-on-one, either in person or remotely. And so you can try, and our goal is to enable you to the point where you're able to configure and get replication going. And then if you want to connect with other folks, go to our SharePlex community, which is www.shareplex.com/community. And as you would expect, there's discussion, blogs, demos, all kinds of additional information available there as well.
And I guess with 18 years track record, there's quite a bit of expertise in that community as well. So that's always going to be useful to tap into. Bill, thank you very much for your time. We're just about on the hour, so thank you for everything that you've taken us through.
Sure.
And just remains for me to thank all of our listeners. So bye for now.
Bye-bye.